Imagine taking the absolute worst memories of your childhood, the moments that made you feel completely worthless, and singing them to millions of people on live television. In a highly manufactured entertainment industry obsessed with absolute perfection, 15-year-old Sophie Pecora achieved the impossible by weaponizing her deepest insecurities. She stepped onto the America's Got Talent stage and delivered a devastatingly raw original song that shattered the reality television formula. This is the incredible, dramatic true story of the quiet teenager who bravely turned her suffocating pain into a powerful, generational anthem. Long before the massive television exposure and the millions of dedicated social media followers, the daily existence of young Sophie Pecora was completely defined by a heavy, suffocating silence. Growing up, she was the ultimate outsider, a deeply sensitive and profoundly introverted teenager who felt entirely disconnected from the fast-paced, highly judgmental social ecosystems of middle school. For a young girl battling severe, crippling social anxiety, simply walking through a crowded school hallway felt like navigating a terrifying, highly hostile psychological minefield. The brutal, unforgiving reality of being relentlessly bullied and constantly feeling completely invisible left deep, unresolved emotional scars. She was not aggressively fighting back or loudly demanding the attention of her cruel peers. Instead, she was quietly retreating further into herself, desperately trying to shrink down and completely disappear to avoid the toxic venom of the people around her. This profound, agonizing sense of total social isolation is an incredibly heavy, dark burden for any young mind to carry completely alone. The deep psychological trauma of being constantly misunderstood and aggressively marginalized created a massive, swelling reservoir of unexpressed emotional pain. She realized with absolute, terrifying clarity that she could not continue to carry this heavy, toxic weight entirely in silence. She desperately needed to find a safe, alternative method to process her intense internal suffering before it completely consumed her, setting the necessary stage for a profound artistic awakening. When the crushing reality of her daily social isolation became absolutely unbearable, she sought desperate refuge in the only physical space where she felt completely safe from judgment. In the quiet, undisturbed sanctuary of her childhood bedroom, heavily shielded from the cruel whispers and the toxic environment of her middle school, she discovered the profound, life-saving power of the acoustic guitar. She did not pick up this instrument with the calculated, manufactured ambition of becoming a massively famous pop star or securing a highly lucrative corporate record deal. She turned to the strings entirely out of absolute, desperate necessity, essentially utilizing the music as a vital psychological lifeline to keep from completely drowning in her own crippling self-doubt. In that deeply intimate, profoundly lonely space, she began to experiment with translating her agonizing emotional reality into actual sound. The guitar became her absolute closest confidant, a reliable, silent partner that allowed her to safely externalize the toxic emotions that were constantly threatening to destroy her from the inside out. Every single chord she painstakingly learned to play was a deliberate, courageous act of emotional defiance against the peers who constantly tried to make her feel entirely worthless. This quiet, solitary practice was never intended for the massive global stage. It was simply a highly necessary daily therapeutic ritual that allowed a terrified young girl to slowly begin piecing her heavily shattered identity back together. The true, undeniable turning point in her incredible artistic evolution occurred when she began to masterfully fuse her acoustic melodies with her deeply personal, brutally honest written thoughts. Sitting entirely alone on her bedroom floor, completely overwhelmed by the lingering pain of severe cyberbullying, she began the highly emotional process of writing the song that would eventually change her entire life. She titled it 7th Grade. The songwriting process for this specific track completely bypassed all the traditional, heavily sanitized rules of commercial pop music. She was not trying to write a generic, universally appealing anthem filled with vague metaphors designed by corporate executives to maximize mainstream radio airplay. Instead, she was meticulously crafting a highly literal, devastatingly accurate diary entry. She weaponized her own agonizing experiences, documenting the exact, terrifying feeling of being called annoying, the desperate desire to simply be noticed, and the heavy, exhausting reality of pretending to be okay when you are completely breaking down. The unique, rhythmic spoken word delivery she carefully developed was incredibly raw, resembling a frantic, emotional confession rather than a traditional melodic performance. By completely refusing to artificially sugarcoat her highly traumatic reality, she successfully created a breathtakingly accurate psychological mirror that perfectly captured the terrifying essence of what it actually feels like to be a misunderstood outcast. Creating that deeply personal, highly vulnerable song was a massive emotional release, but the terrifying decision to actually expose this bleeding truth to the unforgiving digital world required an unimaginable level of sheer bravery. For someone actively battling crippling social anxiety, the internet represents the ultimate, highly dangerous battlefield, a toxic landscape completely filled with anonymous trolls ready to aggressively tear you apart. Yet, driven by a desperate, overwhelming human need to establish a genuine connection, she placed a simple camera in her bedroom, pressed record, and uploaded her raw, unpolished performance directly to YouTube. There was absolutely no massive corporate marketing budget pushing the video, no highly choreographed background dancers, and no expensive studio lighting designed to manufacture a fake, flawless image. It was just a fragile, deeply nervous teenager staring directly into a camera lens, completely exposing her deepest, darkest insecurities to the absolute unknown. This profound act of digital bravery was the necessary critical catalyst. In the heavily curated, profoundly artificial world of modern social media, where millions of users desperately project fake, flawless lifestyles, her brutal honesty acted as a massive, uncontrollable shockwave. The video began to rapidly spread, organically connecting with thousands of highly vulnerable teenagers across the globe who completely recognized their own silent, hidden agony in her trembling voice, sparking a massive grassroots movement. That explosive, entirely organic digital momentum immediately caught the highly predatory attention of the massive mainstream entertainment machine. When the corporate producers behind America's Got Talent finally reached out to secure her for a televised audition, the absolute stakes of her entire existence were instantly and permanently elevated. This was no longer just a safe, highly controlled digital environment where she could easily hide behind a computer monitor. This was an invitation to step into the most intimidating, heavily scrutinized entertainment arena on the entire planet. For a young, highly sensitive introvert, agreeing to explicitly perform her deepest, most painful insecurities on global television in front of millions of highly judgmental viewers is a terrifying, almost insurmountable proposition. The reality television machine is notoriously ruthless, aggressively designed to chew up raw human emotion, package it into easily digestible viral segments, and completely discard the fragile individuals the very second the television ratings drop. Despite the absolute, paralyzing terror that physically gripped her, she made the incredibly brave, highly calculated decision to step directly into the roaring fire. She inherently understood that the massive television platform could fundamentally amplify her urgent message of radical empathy to a scale that was completely impossible to achieve entirely on her own, preparing her for the ultimate test of her psychological resilience. She was bravely walking in to become a fiercely authentic, highly visible representative for every single teenager who had ever been mercilessly bullied into absolute, suffocating silence. The actual physical reality of walking onto that massive television stage was an absolute, overwhelming sensory nightmare that tested the absolute limits of her mental endurance. As she nervously stood in the dark wings, waiting for her specific cue to walk out into the blinding, multi-million-dollar lighting rigs. The sheer, crushing weight of her severe social anxiety threatened to completely paralyze her physical movements. When her name was finally loudly announced, every single step she took toward the center mark felt like walking completely barefoot through a terrifying psychological minefield. The massive, chaotic auditorium was heavily packed with thousands of expectant faces, and seated directly in front of her were four of the most influential, notoriously critical judges in the entire mainstream entertainment industry. Millions of viewers completely witnessed the raw, unfiltered terror physically manifesting in her deeply trembling hands as she desperately gripped her acoustic guitar. In the highly polished, fiercely competitive world of reality television, where absolute, unwavering confidence is practically a mandatory requirement for survival, her visible, extreme fragility was incredibly shocking. She looked like she was completely on the verge of a massive panic attack, completely ready to shatter into a million tiny pieces right there on the global broadcast. But this intense, completely unscripted display of raw human vulnerability was precisely what made the impending moment so incredibly powerful and authentic. The absolute second she leaned heavily into the microphone and delivered the very first spoken word lines of her intensely personal song, a massive, unprecedented shift occurred within the highly chaotic auditorium. The heavy, highly manufactured atmosphere of the corporate reality television show instantly evaporated, completely replaced by a stunned, absolute, and deeply profound silence. She did not attempt to hit massive, operatic high notes or deliver a heavily choreographed, highly energetic pop routine. Instead, she fiercely locked eyes with the massive audience and practically bled her agonizing truth directly onto the stage. As she rapidly delivered her devastatingly literal lyrics about the deep, lingering scars of severe cyberbullying, her trembling voice transformed into a powerful, undeniable weapon of radical empathy. The judges, who are traditionally completely immune to standard television gimmicks, were visibly, physically moved by the brutal, uncompromising honesty of her terrifying confession. She completely shattered the heavily manipulated reality television formula by entirely refusing to play the familiar, highly profitable role of the standard commercial entertainer. For those brief, highly charged minutes, the entire world stopped to actively listen to the incredibly quiet girl from the back of the classroom, witnessing a breathtakingly raw masterpiece that completely paralyzed the massive entertainment machine. She had successfully taken the absolute darkest, most terrifying moments of her entire life and brilliantly alchemized them into an unforgettable generational performance that left an indelible, permanent mark on television history, proving the absolute power of extreme vulnerability. The emotional climax of this incredible television event remains one of the most deeply powerful, heavily watched moments in the entire history of modern reality television. When guest judge and legendary country music icon Brad Paisley slammed his hand down on the highly coveted golden buzzer, the massive auditorium completely erupted into an absolute, deafening frenzy of applause and falling golden confetti. That highly symbolic, incredibly dramatic television gesture was supposed to represent the ultimate, glorious arrival of a brand new mainstream superstar. In that incredibly specific, highly emotional moment, it genuinely felt like the entire universe was finally, loudly validating the quiet, agonizing pain she had carried entirely by herself for so many long years. The glittering golden confetti raining down on her violently trembling shoulders was the absolute, undeniable visual proof that her deep vulnerability was not a massive weakness, but rather her most incredibly powerful, highly valuable asset. However, while the massive television network aggressively framed this triumphant moment as a beautiful, perfect fairy tale ending, it was actually the terrifying, highly complicated beginning of a much darker, incredibly treacherous battle. The massive golden buzzer did not magically erase her severe social anxiety, nor did it completely protect her from the highly predatory, deeply manipulative forces that were rapidly circling her newly found, highly profitable global fame. In the highly chaotic, deeply overwhelming aftermath of her massive television exposure, the harsh, unforgiving realities of the corporate music industry quickly began to ruthlessly close in around her. The traditional, heavily guarded entertainment machine is entirely designed to aggressively consume raw, authentic viral talent, heavily sanitize their unique, gritty edges, and violently force them into highly predictable, massively profitable commercial pop molds. Following her highly unceremonious, sudden elimination from the live voting rounds of the competition, record executives undoubtedly viewed her deeply personal, spoken-word trauma merely as a highly effective marketing gimmick. The immense, suffocating pressure to completely abandon her raw acoustic roots, significantly alter her deeply personal lyrical style, and permanently transform into a highly manufactured, universally appealing product was absolutely relentless. For a young, highly sensitive artist, the glittering promise of massive corporate backing is an incredibly dangerous, deeply deceptive trap that requires willingly signing away absolute creative freedom. This was the ultimate, absolutely critical crossroads of her entire existence. She was deeply forced to make an incredibly difficult, massive decision: completely sell her fragile soul to the highly manipulative mainstream establishment for guaranteed commercial fame, or fiercely protect the raw, quiet authenticity that had initially saved her life in her bedroom. Demonstrating a massive, unprecedented level of professional maturity and fierce artistic integrity, she completely executed the ultimate industry rebellion that permanently defined her legacy. She violently rejected the toxic, creatively bankrupt corporate route, deliberately choosing to walk completely away from the highly manipulative, heavily funded mainstream establishment. Instead of allowing the massive reality television machine to dictate her future narrative, she aggressively utilized the massive global platform she had organically built to establish a highly lucrative, completely independent digital empire. She continued aggressively writing and consistently releasing her own original music, firmly utilizing her deeply personal songwriting as the primary, unfiltered way to intimately connect with listeners who had experienced similar challenges. By masterfully bypassing the traditional, highly gate-kept media channels, she maintained absolute, unyielding control over her own master recordings and her deeply personal artistic vision. That one specific, painfully honest song about severe middle school bullying fundamentally altered the entire trajectory of her existence, completely transforming a terrified, highly isolated outcast into a brilliant, uncompromising, and fiercely independent CEO of her own destiny. Her incredible journey beautifully proves that your deepest, darkest scars can eventually become the exact magnificent foundation upon which you build your entire empire. She definitively proved to the entire entertainment industry that true, lasting success in the modern digital era completely requires an artist to aggressively defend their own unique voice, bravely turning the immense, crippling pain of severe social isolation into an absolute, undeniable superpower of radical human connection.